He opened the door and heard laughter he thought he'd lost forever. And when he saw Amara with his sons, his entire world shifted. Ethan Ward came home broken that day. Another 16-hour marathon at the foundation. Board members questioning his vision, donors pulling funding. His mind was a war zone of spreadsheets, obligations, and the crushing weight of a reputation he wasn't sure he deserved anymore. He pushed through the front door of his Greenwich estate unannounced, ready to surrender to the silence that had claimed his home for 2 years. But then he heard it. Laughter. His son's laughter. His world stopped. Liam, Lucas, and Logan hadn't laughed since Grace died. Not once. He stood frozen in the marble foyer, chasing the sound like a man who'd just heard an angel sing. When he reached the doorway of the sunlit playroom, what he saw didn't just shock him. It awakened something he thought had died with his wife. The day had been merciless. Ethan Ward sat through back-to-back meetings in Manhattan that stripped him to the bone. A grant proposal rejected. His flagship youth program facing closure, 3 board members suggesting he step down, take time to grieve properly. As if grief had an expiration date. By 3, his chest felt too tight to breathe. He grabbed his coat and left without explanation. The drive to Greenwich felt like moving through water. His hands strangled the steering wheel. His mind wouldn't stop replaying the moment Grace stopped breathing. The way the doctors looked at him. The sound of his newborn sons crying in the next room while he fell to his knees. Anger sat in his throat like broken glass. At work, at God, at himself. For somehow believing money and success could fill the crater her death left behind. And for failing his sons so completely, he'd become a stranger in his own home. When he pulled into the circular driveway, exhaustion pressed down on him like a physical weight. He walked through the front door, loosening his tie, expecting what always waited for him. Silence so thick it felt like drowning, the kind that reminded him every single day that Grace was gone and his boys had stopped being children. They'd become shadows, quiet, withdrawn, moving through rooms like they were apologizing for existing. But today something was different. He heard laughter. Real, unrestrained, soul-deep laughter that made time stop. Ethan froze mid-step. His sons, Liam, Lucas, and Logan, laughing. They hadn't laughed in 2 years. Not since Grace died giving them life. Not since that morning he'd come home from a conference to find her cold in their bed. An undetected complication the doctor said was rare, unpreventable, an act of God. His sons had become ghosts after that, too scared to feel, too broken to remember what joy tasted like. The child psychologist said it was trauma. The grief counselor said it was normal. Ethan knew it was his fault. He'd given them everything except the one thing that mattered, himself. But right now, they were laughing. Ethan's briefcase slipped from his fingers and hit the marble with a crack that echoed through the foyer. He moved toward the sound, his heart hammering so violently he thought it might burst through his ribs. Down the hallway toward the playroom, the room Grace had designed with floor-to-ceiling windows that let in rivers of light. He reached the doorway and stopped breathing. Amara Fields, the woman his late wife's mother had hired 6 weeks ago, was on her hands and knees on the hardwood floor. His 3 sons were climbing on her back like she was a mountain they'd been born to conquer. Logan held a length of rope around her shoulders like reins. Amara was laughing, head thrown back, making exaggerated neighing sounds while she bucked gently. Liam and Lucas held on, squealing with a kind of wild, unfiltered joy Ethan thought had been buried with Grace. The afternoon light poured through the windows like liquid gold, and for a moment, just one impossible moment, Ethan felt his wife's presence so strongly he almost called her name. Amara was glowing. Not metaphorically. There was something in the air around her, something peaceful and warm and alive that made the room feel sacred. His sons, the ones who woke up screaming, who barely spoke, who asked him every week when Mommy was coming home, were playing, actually playing, like they'd been set free from a cage only she had the key to. And it wasn't with him, it was with her. A woman he'd barely spoken to beyond polite greetings and schedule updates. She'd done what he couldn't. what every therapist and specialist and expensive intervention couldn't do. She'd brought his sons back to life. The anger from his terrible day evaporated into something else, something that hurt worse. Relief so sharp, it felt like a knife. Gratitude so overwhelming, it buckled his knees. Shame so deep, he couldn't look at himself. Then Amara glanced up. Her eyes met his. The laughter died instantly. Fear flashed across her face, raw and unguarded. She froze, still on her knees. The boys slid off her back and pressed close to her like they were shielding something precious. Ethan stood in the doorway, unable to move, unable to speak, his throat closed, his vision blurred. Amara opened her mouth, but no sound came. He wanted to say something, needed to say something. But all he could do was stare at this woman who'd just performed a miracle in his house. He managed a small nod, barely perceptible. Then he turned and walked away before his sons could see him cry. He didn't understand what had just happened. Didn't know if it was okay to feel this kind of raw gratitude towards someone who was supposed to just be staff. But one thing was undeniable. For the first time since Grace died, his sons were laughing. And maybe, just maybe, God had sent Amara Fields for a reason. Sometimes, God places people in our lives exactly when we need them most. Before we go any further, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from. If you've ever felt like God sent someone into your life at just the right moment, drop a comment below. That night, Ethan didn't sleep. He sat in his home office with the lights off, staring at nothing, watching shadows move across the walls like ghosts. The image wouldn't leave his mind. Amara on the floor, his sons laughing. That sound kept replaying on a loop until he thought he'd lose what was left of his sanity. He kept circling back to the same question. How did she do it? He'd tried everything after Grace died. He'd read every book on childhood grief the internet recommended. He'd hired Dr. Rachel Brennan, the best child psychologist in Connecticut, a woman with degrees from Yale and Columbia who came twice a week with her measured tone and research-backed techniques, sitting cross-legged on the floor with Liam, Lucas, and Logan, trying to coax them into talking about their feelings. It didn't work. The boys just stared at her like she was speaking a language they'd forgotten. He'd bought them new toys, thinking maybe distraction would help. Lego sets and remote-control cars and art supplies that sat untouched in their rooms. He'd rearranged their schedules, hired tutors, made sure they ate balanced meals, and got outside every day. Followed every expert recommendation to the letter. Nothing worked. The boys just got quieter, smaller, like they were slowly erasing themselves. And then Amara Morrison showed up. Ethan leaned back in his chair, pressing his palms against his eyes until he saw stars. He didn't even remember approving her hire. His mother-in-law, Patricia, had called him one afternoon while he was in the middle of negotiating a partnership with the mayor's office. She said the third nanny had quit, something about the house feeling too heavy, too sad, and that she'd found someone new, someone different. Ethan had barely listened. He just said yes and went back to his call. Now he couldn't stop thinking about her. Who was she? Where did she come from? What made her different from the parade of professionals and caregivers who'd walked through his door and left defeated? He opened his laptop and pulled up the file Patricia had forwarded him weeks ago. Amara's application. He realized with a stab of shame that he'd never actually read it. The document was sparse. 29 years old. Previous employer, a family in Boston, children aged 4 and 6. A handwritten note at the bottom in careful script that said, "I understand what it means to live in a house where grief has made itself at home. I won't run from it. I'll sit with it until the light comes back." Ethan stared at those words until they blurred. Most people ran from grief. He knew that now. They didn't know what to say, so they said nothing. They didn't know how to help, so they disappeared. Even his closest friends had stopped calling after Grace's funeral. It was easier for everyone to pretend the wards were fine, moving forward, getting back to normal. But Amara hadn't run. She'd walked straight into the heaviest house in Greenwich and somehow made it breathe again. Over the next 2 weeks, Ethan began to notice things. Small things at first. The way Amara folded the boy's clothes with her eyes closed, her lips moving in what looked like silent prayer. The way she'd pause before serving breakfast, her hand hovering over the plates for just a moment, as if she were blessing the food. One morning he came downstairs earlier than usual and found her in the kitchen with the boys, their small hands clasped together around the table. Her voice was soft, barely above a whisper. "Thank you for this day, for this food, for these precious boys. Cover them with your peace. Let them feel loved. Let them feel safe. Amen." Liam had opened his eyes and smiled at her. Actually smiled. Ethan had backed away before they could see him, his throat too tight to speak. The house began to change. It was subtle, like watching winter slowly surrender to spring. The boys started making eye contact again. They'd run to Amara when she arrived in the morning, wrapping their small arms around her legs like she was the anchor keeping them from drifting away. Ethan heard them talking more, not just single-word responses but actual sentences, stories, questions about the world. One afternoon he stood outside Logan's room and heard him tell Amara about a dream he'd had, something about flying, about seeing Mommy in the clouds. Amara's response was gentle, aching with tenderness. "Your mommy is watching you. Sweet boy. She's so proud of you. And she sent me here to take care of you. Until you see her again." Ethan had to walk away before the tears came. He started coming home earlier. At first, he told himself it was coincidence. Meetings ending sooner than expected. Traffic being lighter than usual. But deep down, he knew the truth. He wanted to see them. Wanted to witness the miracle happening in his own home. One evening he arrived just as Amara was reading to the boys in the living room. All three of them curled up against her on the couch like she was made of safety. She looked up when he entered, and for the first time, their eyes held longer than politeness required. "Mr. Ward," she said softly. "You're home early." He nodded, loosening his tie. "I wanted to see them before bed." Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding that didn't need words. She smiled, and it was like watching light break through storm clouds. They began to talk. Real conversations, not the sterile employer-employee exchanges he'd had with everyone else. One night after the boys were asleep, he found her in the kitchen making tea. He poured himself a glass of water and leaned against the counter. "How do you do it?" he asked. She looked up, confused. "Do what?" "Bring them back. Make them feel again." Amara set down her mug, her expression soft but weighted with something he couldn't name. "I don't bring them back, Mr. Ward. I just sit with them where they are. Grief doesn't need fixing. It needs witnessing." The psychologist said they needed cognitive behavioral interventions, structured emotional processing. Amara smiled sadly. Children don't need interventions. They need presence. They need someone to hold their pain without trying to take it away. Her words hit him like a fist to the chest. Presence, the one thing he'd never given them. He'd given them everything else. The best schools, the best doctors, the best house, but he'd never given them himself. The guilt was a living thing inside him, something with teeth. He thought back to the pregnancy, how he'd been traveling constantly, speaking at conferences, meeting with donors, building the foundation's reputation, while Grace grew their sons inside her body. He'd missed appointments, missed ultrasounds. She'd called him once, voice trembling, saying she felt strange. Something wasn't right. He'd promised to come home early. He hadn't, and 3 weeks later she was gone. An undetected blood clot, the doctors said, was rare. A complication that happened so fast, there was nothing anyone could have done. But Ethan knew better. He should have been there, should have noticed, should have prioritized his family over his empire. Now he was raising 3 sons alone in a house that felt like a mausoleum, and the only person who could reach them was a woman he barely knew. One evening he noticed something. Amara was putting away laundry in the hallway when a photograph slipped from her pocket. She scrambled to pick it up, but not before Ethan saw it. A young boy, maybe 4 or 5, with bright eyes and a wide smile. She clutched it to her chest. her face going pale. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "It's nothing." But it wasn't nothing. Ethan could see the grief carved into her features, the same grief he carried. She'd lost someone. Someone small. Someone precious. He didn't ask. Some pain was too sacred for questions. But he understood then why she was different. She wasn't just helping his sons, she was healing herself. That night, Ethan witnessed something that broke him open. He was walking past Lucas's room when he heard crying. He pushed the door open and found Lucas in bed, tears streaming down his face. "I miss Mommy," he sobbed. Amara was already there, sitting on the edge of his bed, pulling him into her arms. She kissed his forehead, her own eyes glistening. "I know, baby. I know." She held him, rocking gently, and began to pray. "Father, hold this precious boy. Let him feel his mother's love. Even now, comfort his heart. Remind him he's not alone. Let him know that grief is just love that has nowhere to go, and that's okay. We'll carry it together." Lucas's crying slowed. He looked up at her. "You promise?" "I promise," she whispered. She stayed with him until he fell asleep, her hand never leaving his. Ethan stood in the hallway, barely breathing. He finally understood. Amara hadn't given his sons techniques or strategies. She'd given them presence. She'd given them permission to hurt. She'd given them love without conditions. And somehow, in doing that, she'd given them back their lives. That night, alone in his bedroom, Ethan Ward did something he hadn't done since Grace died. He got on his knees, his hands shook, his chest ached, and for the first time in 2 years, he prayed. Not the empty words he'd mumbled at the funeral, not the angry accusations he'd hurled at God in the weeks after. Real prayer, desperate prayer. "God," he whispered into the darkness, "is this you? Did you send her? Because I don't know how else to explain what's happening in my house. My sons are alive again, and I don't think I can take credit for it." The room was silent, but something inside him shifted, something warm and undeniable, like a hand on his shoulder. And for the first time since Grace died, Ethan Ward felt something other than emptiness. He felt hope. The whispers started at the boys' school. Ethan first noticed it during pickup one Tuesday afternoon. He'd arrived early, standing near the entrance with other parents, when he caught fragments of a conversation between two mothers he vaguely recognized from fundraiser galas. "I heard she's living there now." Well, he is a widower. And she's young. Those poor boys. What kind of example is that? Their voices dropped when they saw him, smiles plastering across their faces like masks. Ethan's jaw tightened. He collected his sons and left without a word. By the end of the week, the rumors had spread like infection. The country club, the foundation board meetings, even his assistant mentioned, carefully, that some donors had expressed concern about his personal life affecting his professional judgment. Ethan wanted to rage, to demand how his son's healing had become fodder for gossip. But the worst came when the school's headmaster, Dr. Vincent Carrington, called him in for a meeting. "Mr. Ward," Dr. Carrington began, his hands folded on his mahogany desk, "we've received some questions about the woman caring for your sons. Parents are concerned about her influence. They're wondering if perhaps the boys need more structured, professional support during this transitional time." Ethan's voice came out cold. "My sons are thriving. For the first time in 2 years, they're thriving. And you're telling me that's a problem?" Dr. Carrington shifted uncomfortably. "It's about perception, Mr. Ward. The nature of her relationship to your family. Some parents feel it's inappropriate." The word hung in the air like poison. Inappropriate. As if love and healing could be reduced to something shameful. Ethan left the meeting barely holding his composure. He drove home gripping the wheel so tight his knuckles went white. When he walked through the front door, the house was quiet. Too quiet. He found Amara in the kitchen, preparing dinner, but her movements were mechanical, distant. "Amara?" She didn't look up. The boys are upstairs playing. What's wrong? Her hands stilled over the cutting board. Nothing, Mr. Ward. Everything's fine. But it wasn't fine. He could see it in the way she held herself, like she was trying to disappear. That night, long after the boys were asleep, Ethan heard crying. Soft, broken, the kind that comes from a place words can't reach. He followed the sound to the small chapel room Grace had designed. A quiet space with a single stained glass window and a kneeling bench. Amara was there, collapsed on the floor, her body shaking with sobs. In her hands, she clutched the photograph he'd seen weeks ago. Ethan froze in the doorway. He should have left, should have given her privacy. But something in her grief held him there. Amara, he said gently. She looked up, her face streaked with tears, raw and unguarded. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to disturb anyone. You're not disturbing anyone. He stepped closer, slowly, like approaching something fragile. Talk to me, please. She stared at the photograph, her thumb tracing the edges. His name was Isaiah, she whispered. He was 5 when he died. Leukemia. We fought for 2 years. I prayed every single day. I begged God to save him. But he didn't. Her voice broke. My husband couldn't handle it. He left 6 months after the funeral. Said he couldn't look at me without seeing what we'd lost. So, I lost them both. Ethan's chest felt like it was caving in. Amara, I'm so sorry. Tears falling freely now. Every room echoed with his absence. So I asked God for one thing. Let me hear children laughing again. Let me be useful. Let me love someone else's child since I couldn't save my own. She looked up at Ethan, her eyes shimmering. And then I found your boys, and I thought maybe this was God, giving me a second chance. But now I see I was wrong. Wrong about what? Ethan knelt beside her, his heart hammering. I'm causing problems for your family, she said. People are talking. The school is questioning my presence. Your reputation is being damaged because of me. I don't care what people say. But I do. Her voice was firm despite the tears. Those boys deserve better than to grow up surrounded by gossip and judgment. They deserve stability. And I'm not family, Mr. Ward. I need to remember my place. The words hit him like a blade. Your place? I'm the help, she said quietly. I always have been. Ethan stared at her, something fierce and protective rising in his chest. You're not the help. You brought my sons back to life. You've done what no one else could do. You think that's just a job? She stood, wiping her face, her decision already made. I'm giving my notice. 2 weeks. That should give you time to find someone else. Amara, don't do this. It's already done. She walked past him toward her room, her shoulders straight but trembling. Ethan stood there, paralyzed, watching her go. He didn't sleep. By the time dawn broke, he heard movement in the hallway. He stepped out of his room and saw Amara descending the stairs, a suitcase in her hand. His heart stopped. What are you doing? I thought it would be easier this way, she said without looking at him. Easier for who? For everyone. He moved quickly, blocking the doorway before she could reach it. You're not leaving. Mr. Ward, please. No. His voice was raw, desperate. You don't get to walk into our lives, heal my sons, make them feel safe again, and then just disappear. Because some people don't understand what you mean to this family. I'm trying to protect them. You're running. The words hung between them, sharp and true. She looked up at him, tears spilling over. I can't stay where I'm not supposed to be. Ethan's voice dropped to a whisper, his eyes locked on hers. God didn't send you here to leave. The words shattered something in her. She dropped the suitcase, her hands covering her face as sobs racked her body. And then, from upstairs, 3 small voices called out in unison. Amara! Where are you? Liam appeared at the top of the stairs, rubbing his eyes. Lucas and Logan followed, their faces confused and frightened. Are you going somewhere? Logan asked, his voice small. Amara looked up at them, then at Ethan, then back at the boys. Her entire body trembled. She was torn between fear and love, between what the world said was right and what her heart knew was true. And in that moment, standing in the doorway, with dawn breaking behind her, Amara Fields had to make a choice that would change everything. Amara stayed. She couldn't walk past those three boys standing at the top of the stairs with sleep still in their eyes, calling for her like she was air they needed to breathe. She dropped the suitcase, fallen to her knees, and let them surround her in a tangle of small arms and whispered promises that everything would be okay. Ethan had stood in the doorway watching, something shifting in his chest that felt like the breaking of chains, but the whispers didn't stop. If anything, they got louder. 2 weeks later, Ethan received an invitation he couldn't refuse. Connecticut Business Journal wanted to feature him in their annual philanthropy issue, a cover story about the Ward Foundation's impact on youth programs across the state. It should have been straightforward. But when he arrived at the studio for the recorded interview, he knew immediately something had changed. The reporter, Amanda Chen, was professional, polished, and she started with safe questions about funding, partnerships, program outcomes. Then she shifted. Mr. Ward, there's been considerable public interest in your personal life recently, specifically regarding the woman caring for your sons. Some have questioned whether the relationship is appropriate given your position and her employment status. Would you care to address those concerns? Ethan felt the heat rise in his chest. The cameras were rolling. The studio lights were blinding. This was the moment. He could deflect, give a political answer, protect his reputation, and move on. Or he could tell the truth. He leaned forward, his hands clasped, his voice steady. I'd be happy to address it. Amara Fields came into my home when my sons were ghosts. They hadn't laughed in 2 years. They barely spoke. They'd withdrawn so deeply into grief that every specialist I hired told me it would take years, maybe a lifetime, for them to recover. I tried everything. The best therapists, the best programs. I gave them everything money could buy, and none of it worked. He paused, his jaw tight. Then Amara arrived. And within weeks, my sons were laughing again. They were playing. They were living. She didn't use techniques or interventions. She used presence. She sat with them, in their pain. She prayed over them. She loved them without conditions, and she brought them back to life. Amanda started to interject, but Ethan held up his hand. Let me finish. The rumors you're referring to, the whispers about inappropriateness, they're rooted in something ugly. The idea that someone's value is determined by their job title or their paycheck. Amara Fields is not my employee, she's family. She restored my sons when I couldn't, and the fact that people are more concerned with her position than with the miracle she performed tells me everything I need to know about where our priorities have gone. His voice grew stronger, more passionate. Where there was death in my home, she brought life. Where there was silence, she brought laughter. Where there was hopelessness, she brought faith. And if people want to turn that into something scandalous, that's their burden to carry, not mine. The studio went silent. Amanda Chen blinked, clearly not expecting the raw honesty. So you're saying the rumors are unfounded? I'm saying the rumors are irrelevant, Ethan said firmly. What matters is that 3 boys who lost their mother have found someone who loves them unconditionally. What matters is that healing happened in a house that felt like a tomb. What matters is that God answered a prayer I didn't even know how to pray. The interview ended shortly after. Ethan left the studio feeling exposed, vulnerable, like he'd just stripped himself bare in front of the world. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew he'd told the truth. And that had to be enough. The segment aired 3 days later. Within hours, it went viral. Clips of Ethan's declaration spread across social media like wildfire. Thousands of comments poured in. Parents shared their own stories of unexpected caregivers who changed their children's lives. People talked about the classism embedded in domestic work, the way society devalued the labor of love. Grief counselors and child psychologists weighed in, affirming that presence mattered more than credentials. The hate that had fueled the rumors began to crumble under the weight of resonance and truth. Ethan's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Donors called to express support. Other philanthropists reached out to collaborate. The school's headmaster sent a formal apology, stating that the administration stood behind the Ward family's choices. Even strangers stopped him on the street to thank him for speaking up. But none of it mattered as much as what happened the following Sunday morning. Ethan was in the kitchen making coffee when he heard the boys thundering down the stairs, their laughter echoing through the house. They burst into the room, still in pajamas, and ran straight to Amara, who was setting the table for breakfast. "Mama, Amara," Logan shouted, throwing his arms around her waist. "Can we make pancakes?" Time stopped. Ethan's hand froze mid-pour. Amara's eyes went wide, filling instantly with tears. "What did you just call me?" she whispered. Liam looked up at her, his expression innocent and certain. "Mama Amara, that's your name." Lucas nodded. "You take care of us like a mama, so that's what you are." Amara's knees buckled. She sank into a chair, pulling all three boys into her arms, her body shaking with sobs. "Oh, my sweet boys," she breathed. "My sweet, beautiful boys." Ethan stood frozen, watching the scene unfold, and suddenly everything made sense. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't luck. This was divine intervention. This was God's signature, written across their story, in letters too bright to miss. Healing, redemption, resurrection. He thought about Grace, about the way she used to pray over their unborn sons, asking God to surround them with people who would love them well. He thought about Amara's prayer in the chapel, begging God to let her hear children's laughter again. He thought about his own desperate plea just weeks ago, asking if God had sent her. And standing there in his kitchen, watching this woman hold his sons like they were the answer to a question she'd been asking for years, Ethan Ward finally understood. God hadn't just sent Amara to heal his sons. He'd sent her to heal all of them, including him. Over the following weeks, something shifted in Ethan. He stopped seeing his life as divided into categories: work and home, employer and staff, duty and desire. He began to see it as whole, as sacred, as a story God was writing with hands he couldn't see but could finally feel. He started coming home not out of obligation but out of hunger. Hunger to be present, to witness his sons growing, to sit across from Amara at dinner and talk about everything and nothing. He noticed the way she smiled when she thought no one was watching, the way she hummed while folding laundry, the way her prayers at night had started, including his name. And he realized, with a clarity that felt like lightning, that he didn't want her to be the nanny. He didn't want her to be the help. He wanted her to be exactly what his sons had named her: family. One evening, after the boys were asleep, Ethan found himself standing in the playroom where it had all begun. The room was bathed in the golden light of late afternoon, the same light that had framed Amara that first day. He could still hear the echoes of his son's laughter, still see her on her hands and knees, glowing with a kind of peace he'd thought was lost forever. Amara appeared in the doorway, her expression soft. "You, okay?" He turned to her, and for the first time in years, he smiled without weight behind it. "Yeah, I think I finally am." She stepped into the room, and they stood there together in the light, surrounded by toys and memories and the quiet hum of a home that had learned to breathe again. The boys' laughter drifted down from upstairs, wild and unrestrained. Amara's hand brushed against his, and Ethan Ward closed his eyes and whispered a prayer he'd been holding since the day Grace died. "Grace, if you're listening, thank you. Thank you for sending her." The room filled with warmth, with light, with something that felt like benediction. And in that moment, Ethan understood what he'd been searching for all along. Not answers, not explanations, just this: a broken family made whole again, not by money or strategy or willpower, but by divine timing. By a woman with a wounded heart who'd asked God to let her love again. By 3 boys who'd been given permission to heal. By a man who'd finally learned that presence was the only currency that mattered. The story didn't end with fireworks or grand declarations. It ended the way all true miracles end: quietly, gently, with gratitude, and with the unshakable certainty that God had been writing this story all along.